Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Now, as we cover this conflict is having ramifications. It is having ramifications with other conflicts that we are seeing around the world. One conflict in point is the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia. It is now being reported that Armenian forces have agreed to a complete withdrawal from Nagorno-karabakh. What does that mean? Does that mean that all Armenians that live in the town, the city of Stepanakert, are they going to be moved into Armenia proper? You have about 100,000 Armenians living still in the Nagorno-Karabakh enclave. You still have Armenian military forces in this enclave. And it now appears that those forces are going to indeed withdraw into Armenia proper. And it's interesting to see that as Armenia started to cozy up with the West, that Russia started to distance itself from supporting the Armenians through direct military action. Could the Russians have supported the Armenians directly with a military threat from the north of Azerbaijan? This area here. Russia here, Dagestan, and Azerbaijan. We don't know. We don't know at this point. What we do know is that the Armenians, both the Armenian military and more importantly, our Armenian forces in Nagorno-Karabakh did not believe their situation was tenable. They did not believe that they could maintain an adequate defense of Nagorno-Karabakh under the current conditions. Because look, they're essentially surrounded. If we go back to the Armenian Azeri war map, the area is controlled by the Armenians is this area here in this light brown. The blue is the corridor maintained by Russian peacekeepers, which we have information was recently attacked by Azeri forces. And in fact, there may have been Russian casualties in this attack. The area outside of this light tan is controlled by Azeri forces. That includes forces up near the border with Armenia proper, to the south of the Nagorno-Karabakh enclave. This area in blue was all retaken by Azeri forces, and then these areas were eventually abandoned near the border. Now, what could have Armenia done to prevent this from happening? Because this is a major change of events. The fall of Nagorno-Karabakh, the military defeat of the essentially Armenian military, which over the past decades had an upper hand against the Azeris. But after 2 decades of direct support from the Turks, from a massive infusion of Israeli military assistance directly to Azerbaijan, and the dictatorship that exists in Azerbaijan, has led to what we're seeing now. And the war between Russia and Ukraine was really the straw that broke the camel's back. I think at this point, the Azeris fully understood, Azerbaijan fully understood that the Russians were not going to intervene on behalf of the Armenians. And that's what led to the status quo. Now, this is not an ideal map because it's very difficult to see national borders, but again, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Russia, Turkey, Iran. And as we speak, it sounds like Azeri troops are going to be rolling into Stepanakert and seizing control of all of Nagorno-karabakh. Very interesting. Now, as we watch the continuation of the war between Russia and Ukraine, what is next for the Ukrainians? Clearly, their offensive operation in the Zaporizhzhia sector has failed. We are continuing to see some offensive operations by the Ukrainians, but nonetheless, the Ukrainians have taken massive amounts of casualties in this unsuccessful operation. And make no mistake, in the annals of history, this Ukrainian offensive will go down as a military defeat. It is not being called that by the mainstream media as of yet, but that is what the Ukrainians are facing. So what is the Ukrainians' next option? Remember, their original military goal was the severing of the land corridor between Russia proper and Russia proper in the Crimea, and then ultimately having the ability to threaten the Crimea with direct military action. So that appears to be off the table as we watch this ongoing conflict. It does appear that the Ukrainians are attempting an access denial strategy. They are attempting to besiege the Crimean Peninsula with long-range cruise missiles, drones, and long-range multiple launch rocket systems, and the use of special operations forces. Now, is that going to be effective? Well, it will be effective in terms of causing the Russians problems. That latest strike by the Ukrainians, which targeted Sevastopol, which targeted the Russian Kilo-class submarine in dry dock and the amphibious warfare ship that was located in dry dock in Sevastopol. That attack could have been much more significant in terms of damage inflicted by the Ukrainians. And the reason it wasn't was because of the Russian air defenses. The Russian air defense network was able to destroy many of the inbound Storm Shadow cruise missiles that brought destruction to the Kilo-class submarine and the amphibious warfare ship in dry dock. There were additional targets that the Ukrainians wanted to hit with those Storm Shadow missiles. And unfortunately for the Ukrainians, those Storm Shadows were shot down. 2 ended up hitting targets, meaning the Kilo-class submarine and the amphibious warfare ship. Other targets were missed because those Storm Shadows were shot down by Russian assets, Russian air defense assets. Now, the Ukrainians will be able to continue this, and it will continue. But at the same time, the Russians are going to target Ukrainian assets deep inside of Ukraine. Now, we have heard some discussion that the Russians could be planning for an operation against Odessa. So when I say operation, what does that mean? Does it mean that the Russians are preparing for some sort of ground operation to seize control of Odessa? A joint ground operation and amphibious warfare operation to threaten Odessa? No, that's not what's going to happen. The Russians would have to cross or recross the Dnieper River. They would also have to cross multiple other very large river-type terrain features. They would have to seize fairly large Ukrainian cities, again, such as retake Kherson. They would have to retake Mykolaiv. They would have to position blocking forces further north towards Kryvyi Rih and forces coming from northern Ukraine to intercept this ground operation. At the same time, we would probably see an attempted Russian amphibious warfare operation against Odessa or areas near Odessa. And for Russia, that is simply not going to happen. The likelihood that we will see some sort of Russian effort to seize control of Odessa is not going to manifest itself. The Russians do not have the assets required currently to conduct that type of operation. Again, most of the Russian buildup right now in terms of military capacity is running from east of Kupiansk, this area here, south towards the Seversk pocket. That is where we are seeing the largest Russian buildup. And the Russians have holding positions in Zaporizhia. If we look at the deployment map of what the Russians have in the west, in Kherson Oblast, obviously it is enough to hold from a possible Ukrainian amphibious operation or river crossing operation along the Dnieper River. The Russians are not building up military capability to threaten Odessa. That is not going to happen. That is completely off the table. Now, could the Russians target Odessa in other ways? Absolutely. And we believe that the Russians have plans for Odessa in the coming weeks and months. The Russians are increasing production of cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and other systems that can strike targets in and around Odessa. But again, the likelihood of a direct military operation, military ground operation against Odessa is not going to happen. We will see Russian airstrikes. We will see the continued use of Russian cruise missiles, Iskander missiles, long-range drones, and other assets hitting targets not just in Odessa, but all through Ukraine. And that's going to pick up. And that tempo is going to increase. Now, the likelihood that we may see a very large Russian ground operation within the vicinity of Kharkov, I would say, is more likely. When is that going to happen? When is that going to occur? We do not know. But we do know the Russians are building up forces in this area. But for right now, the campaign for both sides in terms of the seizure of territory right now appears to be delayed. We think at this point the Ukrainians are going to focus on continued HIMARS strikes, continued drone strikes to make it costly for continued Russian operations in their existing positions, while at the same time continuing this anti-access strategy towards Crimea. And we expect that the Russians will continue to counterattack and launch attacks against Ukrainian arms depots, supply hubs, energy infrastructure, and the ability for the Ukrainians to continue the war. Again, this war is probably going to last at least another year. In the best case scenario, at least another year. Now that is going to give time for the Russians to continue this massive military buildup that we are seeing. Is that going to allow the Russians to conduct such a large buildup that we could see larger offensive operations in the not too distant future? Possibly. So that's where we are for today. We are going to continue to cover what is happening on the ground, what is happening in other areas. Again, what occurred with Armenia and Azerbaijan is incredibly significant. It is going to hurt Russia's position in terms of Russia's smaller alliances. By allowing the Azeris to seize control of Nagorno-karabakh, this is not going to help the Russian cause. At the same time, you have to wonder what the Russians are thinking about Aliyev and the regime in Azerbaijan. There are more than one way to skin a cat, and Aliyev could be that cat. Have a good day, everybody.